insights and tips and tools about how to become more effective speaking in the media. That's on the agenda today. I love doing it. In the past, I've probably done hundreds of live in-person trainings. It's a little bit more remote these days. And it's one of my favorite topics because I think what a lot of people don't realize is the media and learning how to communicate effectively in the media is a great tool, a great process for learning how to communicate in your next business meeting or conference call or board meeting or investor pitch meeting or whatever it might be. It actually forces you to be very concise, to be very persuasive, to be cognizant of your time, to do all of these things. So this is one of my favorite all-time topics, and I'm very glad to be with you today. So as we go through this, I'm going to break down a few different components of this. We're going to start out talking about how media training is a widely applicable skill, how it's actually useful beyond just media training itself, but what are the key components of that. We're going to talk a lot about how do you start to take control of an interview where you're the interviewee, you're the person being questioned, but there's elements of control you are able to exert. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk today about sort of your toolbox of answers. How do you structure an answer? Might you use a data point or an analysis or a prediction or an anecdote? We're going to talk about the components of any answer. Also, we're going to talk about how to drive and direct the interview. Do you want to be quoted? Do you want to go more in depth on a topic? Do you want to hit your messaging point without seeming like you're hitting your messaging point? We'll talk about all of that as well. And then we're going to give you some specific strategies for TV, radio, magazines, newspapers, online. So we're going to talk about all of that as well and give you some insight into how you can actually customize this and make this work for you, whatever the medium. So today's presentation, Media Training Masterclass, it is for those who will need to be in the media. It's those who need to train others how to be in the media. It's for those who want to put your own training on how to train others to be in the media. And if you're one of those people, you're in the right place. And if you're just someone who wants to become a more effective public speaker, you're in the right place as well. So that being said, I'm going to share my screen. I'll give you a little bit of background about how we look at this and look at the world. And just by way of background, this is a training we do as part of PR Hacker. PR Hacker is one of the agencies in our agency network, which is called Top Worldwide. We have 12 different agencies with different specialties. And actually, since I'm doing this topic in the media, my background in this actually comes originally from something that's over my shoulder right over there. Which is the first book I wrote when I was straight out of college, called How to Go to College Almost for Free. It was on winning college scholarships. And what I actually did, I was a recent college grad, had self-published 5,000 copies of the book, and we eventually sold 2.5 million copies of the book, and it was all through earned media. So it was all through, my typical day would start with 5 to 10 interviews every morning. Talking about scholarships and financial aid and paying for college and getting admitted to college. And I would do TV interviews and radio interviews, and I would structure these moments to do a whole bunch of newspaper interviews. And so I did 5,000 interviews in a very short amount of time, which launched the book. And so that later led to starting a PR agency, which later became a global marketing agency, but it kind of all starts with personal experience and then coaching other people do it. So that's the kind of the sort of surprising background for the CEO of a marketing agency. But then let's talk about how we do this in our everyday work. So just TOP, in case you're wondering, is a global marketing agency. We think in terms of data-driven thinking. It's an acronym that stands for Test, Optimize, and Perform. So we even do that with media trainings. We do that as well. We have 48 different marketing disciplines and 6 functional groups. We have people on the ground in 20 plus countries now around the world. So our all hands meeting every Monday and Friday, it sort of looks like the United Nations, and we do media trainings all over the world. And these are some of the agencies in our network, which has specialties including top government or top finance or top health or top tech. And also we have a digital agency, Top Digital, a creative agency, Top Creative. So we span the gamut of the things we do. And these are some of the places that we work. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to talk about the hidden benefits of media training, why I think it's impactful for really any professional to be a part of this. We're going to talk about the 5 B's of successful media interviews. What are those things that are kind of so core and so fundamental that if you get those right, it's pretty hard to screw up an interview. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about understanding the 4 types of interview answers. There's only 4. So there's 4 that's in your building blocks that you can kind of put together and compare and contrast in different ways. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about how to direct and drive the interview, number 4. So what are the mechanisms that you have in place to control the interview a little bit better? And then we'll talk about how to increase clarity and quotability. So if you really, 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 really want the reporter to get this quote, what can you do about it besides saying really repeatedly? We'll talk about it. We're going to talk about strategies for TV, print, and online. As I mentioned, it's very different. And if you want to use the medium well, what you do for TV is totally different than what you do for print. So we'll talk about that. And then finally, what to do in special circumstances. Okay, so action-packed. This is all from PR Hacker, our data-driven, viral, PR-based agency that uses a ton of TV to seed messages and get them to spread virally. And without further ado, let's begin. If you have questions, feel free to comment them in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to jump in, and I think there's some other stuff in here about a little bit about me, and I've actually became a contributor to CNN. CNBC, Fox News over my history, and was a syndicated columnist before that. So that being said, why is media training an important skill? Why is it something that infuses your effectiveness as a communicator almost better than anything else? And so let me kind of give you 6 reasons on that. So reason number 1 is that you can learn to speak in a way that people take notice. The medium of media has a prize, a reward in terms of attention, focus, if you can learn how to talk in a way that people really listen. So imagine you're on a morning show like CBS This Morning or the Today Show, and someone's going about their day. They're in their kitchen, they're making breakfast, they're feeding their kids, and then you come on for the interview. They may not be paying attention, but if you come on and you can speak in a way that people take notice, and suddenly they stop, they look over, they pay attention. Oh, what's this? They might not even know the topic. So 1, media training teaches you to do that. Second, you can clearly and concisely define your key messages. So the problem is if I'm just talking and I'm just talking like, run-of-the-mill meeting during the day, I might meander. I might take a detour. I might take an alternate route to get to what I mean. I might not even get to what I mean. But with media, you are trained and you learn how to clearly and concisely bring it back to your key message. So really, really important. If you do a lot of TV, you're going to learn how to do that in 2 minutes or less. Incredibly important when you can take a 30-minute meeting to get to your point and get to it in 2 minutes and have the other 28 meetings to talk about next steps or action steps or just give people time back in their day. Number 3 reason why media training is hugely important is that you can gracefully handle answers to difficult questions. So when you're really keyed in, and it's amazing when we do this transformation, we do these day-long or half-day training sessions for our clients or for companies that bring us in. And we get, not everyone gets there, but a good number of people get there where they get to the point where they're so confident that no matter what question they get asked, they're going to be able to handle it. Doesn't mean they know the answer to every question, but they know how to navigate those answers to the questions. So it's a skill that teaches you that sort of grace in handling difficult questions. It gives you tremendous confidence in any kind of professional, personal setting because you know that you'll be able to answer those questions. Okay, number 4 reason why media training is important is that you can better control the media interview. So it's a question of control, and it doesn't have to all just be responsive, reactive. There's proactive things you can do. So that sense of control, particularly if you're somebody who gets a little nervous, really, really helps. Reason number 5, media training is hugely important, is that you are less likely to get misquoted. I'm going to show you some techniques for specifically making sure your quotes are exactly as you want, but you can really reduce getting misquoted, misconstrued. And so as I said in the media where celebrities will say, you know, I was misquoted. Oh, this was taken out of context. Politicians like to do that. Well, there's actually, I mean, you can't control everything, but there's more control you can have over what that context is so that you're not misquoted. We'll talk about that. And reason number 6 that media training is hugely important is that you can get more returns on the time investment. So maybe you are a company founder, you're a company executive, you're a C-suite member, or someone who's very senior. Maybe you're the person who interfaces with that person. So to make media worthwhile, to drive ROI, there's some things you can do. And I learned that from the books. Like there's some things I could say. And if I did that, one time I was on CNN and 80,000 people went and purchased my book within 24 hours from that one CNN appearance. I went on CNN again. I didn't do those things. And I got, you know, a couple thousand sales. So there's things you can do to maximize the return on investment. And that makes media training hugely important as well. And we come through it, and our approach is what we call a you first media training, which is we try to deliver value to you, the audience first, and then our agenda gets to ride along with it. But if we do that skillfully, all of our goals in terms of ROI, spent, you know, time preparing for this interview, spent time doing this interview, my team had to prep me for this interview, it can all be so worthwhile to your business goals. All right, so those are 6 reasons, and let's just, I'll kind of jump out of here for a second. I'll stop the screen share. Let me know if there's any questions. You can add a question in the chat right now. And now we're gonna get to the heart of it, and we're gonna talk about the 5 B's of successful media interviews. And specifically, what are those 5 fundamental things that if you get that right and you screw up a lot of other stuff, you will still be fine. You will still be successful. All right. So I'm going to share my screen now, and let's go to the first B, which is something that a lot of people overlook. The first B is be likable. Be likable. People don't want to watch or listen or hear for people they don't like. So if you are likable from the start, no matter what the topic is, it puts you ahead of the game. Sometimes it's a super serious topic, right? So it's like you're likable in a different sense. It's not all like, you know, kind of fun and games and comedy, but it's still likable from how you approach it. So I think the number one thing that instantly makes you likable is your smile, So we teach people, you're smiling in print interviews, you're smiling in radio interviews, you're smiling in things that no one's ever going to see your face, because it transforms how you talk about things. So first thing you got to do is you have to be likable, at minimum, likable to the interviewer, the journalist, right? There's a difference in tone if you're likable as part of that. So that's your first task, is be likable. And you do that in the context of what's appropriate, right? So it's a very serious subject when it happen. I mean, you're not, you know, cracking jokes and smiling like a big, huge grin on your face if it's a super, you know, serious issue related to the pandemic. If it's something more lighter, you might, but that's your first thing, is be likable. Second, be believable. The second B of a successful media interview is you have to be believed to be heard. So you're trying to establish really early on why you're an expert. You're trying to connect personal experiences to help establish your expertise. So that believability is really, really important. So that might mean, in terms of one, being very kind of cool and comfortable and collected on this topic. So that's just through practice, and we can train that. It's also about maybe referencing a little bit of a credential early on, whether that's a personal experience or something professionally, or something that just gives a tidbit early on to establish that you really know your stuff. But I'd sort of say, if these are like gates, first gate is likability, right? I just like, am I even going to pay attention? I don't want to sit here and listen to someone I don't like, right? Second gate is believability. Well, if I'm going to take advice, expertise, and if you're in the media, it's probably, you know, that's one of the big reasons, right? It's for your advice, your expertise, your experience, your situation, your position. Is this a credible person? So you got to establish that really, really fast. The third one, this is one that a lot of people overlook, particularly people that are like, oh, I'm very corporate. It's a very corporate setting. You need to protect a corporate image. That's all important. But the third B is be passionate. And why is passion really important? Because if you're passionate, you're the anti-salesman. And I'll just kind of leave the screen share for a second here. It's like, when you are passionate, you have more room to promote things. It's like, you can't help it, right? It's like, no one wants to, hey, right here, no one wants to be sold to. I'm selling to you right now. But if you're passionate, you can't help it. You love the topic. You love your products. You love your services. You couldn't be more excited about the new launch coming up. You're given leeway to do that. Why? Because you're passionate. You can't help it. This isn't coming from a place of you're trying to do something to someone or trick someone or have your own agenda. So it's like, you can't help it. You're passionate. So be passionate becomes the third B of a really successful interview. You can figure out a way to bring passion to your subject in whatever your own voice, right? People express passion in different ways, right? Your position might express passion in different ways. But if you're, if you are likable, if you are believable, if you're passionate about your subject, you get through those three gates, you're well on your way, and you're given a lot of leeway to screw up, not say something quite right. Maybe, you don't have the perfect answer to that. That's okay if you get those first three things. Brings us to the fourth B. So the fourth B is be helpful. Be helpful. So seek to first add value to the audience, then promote your goals, right? You're allowed to promote your goals, but you've got to deliver value first. So we often do this by, if you want to make, a list of your, let's say, your product or service features, and you're like, what are your 5 key selling points? How do you turn those into a series of how-to stories or examples that are helpful first, but then in turn allow you to promote what you want to say? So how can you create a call to action that first helps the audience, not how it helps your company or brand? So I used to do this when I used to do books, right? I would say, well, let's give useful, helpful scholarship and financial aid advice. Let's do that first. Let's be so useful that people realize, like, wow, if I can get this much use out of hearing, Ben on the TV for 5 minutes, imagine how much use I would get if I got the book, right? As opposed to being like, I've got a book, it's really useful, you should get it. Instead, put the audience first. And that is just the world we live in now because of the nature of how influencers, thought leadership has changed. We want to see value first, right? There's a lot of experts out there, but there's fewer experts that deliver value in a succinct, concise, effective way. And if you experience that, you usually want to learn more. Okay, so that's the fourth B. The fifth B, be memorable. Be memorable. So you can do everything we've said so far, right? You're likable, you're believable, you're passionate, you're doing all these things. You're actually being helpful. But if we want someone to do something from this, we've got to be memorable, right? How do they go tell another decision maker at their company that they just saw you on CNBC and they ought to really get you this solution? How do they, if they are the decision maker, remember that, like, I've got to get on this, and we need to make a decision about their service by the end of the course. So look to add personal anecdotes, stories that are easy to remember. Generally, we teach our clients to work in a call to action at least twice, and definitely in the end, whatever that is. If it's like, go to this site to get the white paper, if it's something else, work in that call to action. And what we try to do to be memorable is we usually don't advocate memorizing things. Like, this is exactly what I'm going to say in exactly the order, and we're just going to get that perfectly. We like to see people reinvent their company, their brand messages every time you explain them. That doesn't mean you're off message. That's defined. But how you do it is new and fresh every time. And we really generally like that because, one, it's more memorable, and two, it causes people to screw up less. Because sometimes if it's memorized in exact sequence and then something happens, the interviewer jumps in and cuts you off, then you're like, oh no, where am I in my list? How do I get back? As opposed to being able to reinvent it fresh and new. So there you have it. Be likable, be believable, be passionate, be helpful, and be memorable. And if you do those 5 things, even if you screw up a media answer or don't do it quite right, you're given a lot of leeway, a lot of freedom. So I'm going to pause right there. Are there any questions? Feel free to kind of put them in the chat if you're joining us on Zoom. If you're on a different channel, hold your question. I'll give you my email at the end as well. You can email me, and we'll get into the next section. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about understanding the 4 types of interview answers. There's 4 fundamental answers you can give. If you can learn to put those in different combinations, it can make your answers more effective, more complete, and actually just give you a ton of confidence in answering literally any question you could be asked. All right, so I'm going to go back into the screen share, and let's talk about that. So this is understanding the 4 types of interview answers. First type. I love this one. We're a data-driven agency. It's called the data point. So one type of answer we can give, whatever the question is, we can provide a fact, a statistic, another noteworthy tidbit that informs or enlightens. So whatever our topic is, I like to come in armed with a few data points, or have our clients come in armed with a few data points that are go-to data points that are very compelling. That's answer type number one. Answer type number two, the analysis. The analysis. So let's say, and just for argument's sake, and here I'm going to kind of go here, and let's say that we give a data point, or a data point is given to us. Our second type of answer is like, so what? Why? Why does this matter? So second is we can give an analysis of that. So sometimes we'll see kind of sequentially. Question comes in, answer, boom, data point, to analysis. Or question comes in, it has a data point. It's asking us about a data point. Boom, analysis, then second data point, right? So we're starting to like we're using these as answers, but we're starting to combine them in different ways, in different orders to have a more effective answer, okay? So we've seen like kind of two types of answers we can give, right? And let me kind of go back into the presentation and we'll talk about number three here. So let's go here. So number three, answer types you can give, a prediction. This gets overlooked a lot, but like this is oftentimes what can make you really like a high value thought leader, right? Like how can we extrapolate past news, past data points, maybe past analysis, and make a prediction on what's going to happen now. So I did a whole series of interviews with local TV stations and some national TV stations across the country. It was from a data study we had done. One of our agencies within TOP is called TOP Data. We're a market research agency. We do fun market research projects. One of them we did was we looked at cell phone GPS aggregate data to say how much are certain cities social distancing. And could we do that, use that to predict, hence prediction, COVID-19 waves happening 2 or 3 weeks later? So we had some interesting data based on, this kind of social distancing GPS data. We had that. We did some analysis on what does that mean? Okay, social distancing is up in Phoenix, it's down in Houston. What does that mean? But then we were able to add to it a prediction element. So that is forward casting. We do a ton of this. One of our clients, is AAA, the car roadside service. And what AAA does is says, okay, how many drivers are going to be on the road for Labor Day? Let's make a prediction. And we look at past data and predict for future data, right? So it's a prediction. So that's the third thing in our arsenal. And then the fourth way to answer any question is an anecdote. So let's provide a story that brings a particular point to life in an interesting or memorable way, right? So I can go in there and I can, give the data point, give an analysis, make a prediction, and say, actually, in my experience just the other day when I was in town and I was in the mall and I noticed how people were moving and reacting really differently depending on if it was a large space or a small space, and social distancing was different. And so I could talk about that as an anecdote in the context of all this. So the point I want to make, just to review these, again, 4 ways to answer: a data point, an analysis, a prediction, or an anecdote, but you can do these in different combinations in the same answer. So I get asked a question, maybe I'm going to talk about that personal experience first, and I'm going to sync that to a analysis, right? Or maybe I'm going to do the data point, hit that, and then I'm going to go right to a prediction and then a personal story. Or maybe I'm going to start with that analysis and go right to a personal story and then end it with a prediction. So these are 4 different components, but they can be used in different combinations to actually have a very, very wide, rich array of answers that seem very complete and can reach people in different ways. Okay, so data point, analysis, prediction, anecdote. So we've learned now why media training is important, getting this as a skill is important. We've learned what are the 5 B's, the things that if you get that right, you can screw up a lot of stuff. And now we've learned 4 ways to answer any question. Let's give them a data point. Let's give them a prediction. Let's do an analysis. Let's tell a story. let's use all of that to learn how to direct and drive the interview. Okay, so that's this section. And first thing I want to talk about, first way to direct or drive the interview is, it's an obvious one. A lot of people don't do it though. Ask the reporter about their intended angle for the story. So it's one of the first things I do if I'm going to be interviewed or I'm training someone what to do. And this assumes we're not on live TV, where presumably we ask this ahead of time to the producer. We're doing a print interview, we're doing an online interview. Maybe I'm like talking with the host of a radio show before going on, a few minutes before. And I just ask them, where do you want to go with this? What's your angle? What's most interesting to you? This does a couple things that are really important. One, if their angle matches where I want to go with this, great, fantastic. Let's go with that. I know they want to go in that direction. So I know I can start to think, what can I give them that just kind of goes more in that direction? I want to go there anyway. Let's go. B, it doesn't match, right? It's going in a different direction. Okay, now I know that. Now I can how do I start thinking about how to steer this back to a direction I want to go? I can course correct. I can say, you know what? We can certainly touch on that, but I think actually what's really interesting is this other thing that you might want to touch upon. And usually they're like, oh, really? Or three, there's a third option, which is they say, I'm not sure, right? It's about, this general topic. I want to talk about cybersecurity generally. Oh, once I hear that, now I know that I can give them structure. I can give them a way to approach it. I might say, okay, if we're going to talk about cybersecurity, let's divide this down into 3 components. Let's look at security itself, let's look at identity protection, and let's look at privacy, right? There's 3 ways to structure. They're like, oh, okay. So in their mind, they're already like, okay, security, identity, privacy, that's how I'm going to structure. I'm going to think about this. This is how my story is. We're already shaping what the story is. So that's number 1. And I'll go back into the screen share, which is actually ask about the reporter about their intended angle for the story. And one of the things I find is I often like to do this. I mean, if it's a 2-phased approach where I'm talking to the producer and I want to talk to a host, I'll talk to the producer first. I'll ask them that. We'll shape the story. But then once I get in front of the host, I'll ask them again. Why? Because things change. Maybe the host wasn't briefed the same way. Maybe there was breaking news that day. Maybe it was supposed to be a 10-minute segment and it got shortened to 2, and they've got a different thing than what they're going to get into. So because of the nature of breaking news, this can change. So I like to ask it again right at the moment we're gonna do that interview. Number 2, in terms of how to direct and drive the interview, help the reporter think about how to organize the story. So no one wants to be told exactly right this point, right? I've been a journalist before. I was a syndicated columnist. I don't want the interviewee telling me, exactly how to write the story. But I might be open to thinking about, how should I organize it? How could people understand it better? Oh, if we're talking about, let's say, one of the topics I used to do back, 20 years ago, back in the day, we're talking about, paying for college. Let's talk about pre-financial aid application, during application season, and post-financial aid application, right? That's a framework, the way to think about how to organize it. Oh, if we're trying to position our company, you might say, yeah, the industry is organized into the players who are the custom solutions and the stock solutions. But I think what's really interesting is this third type of play that we exemplify, which is the customize at scale solutions, right? So right there, you're saying oh, you just frame this in a way to think about your industry as a differentiated third way. Now you're influencing how they write the story. So it's not just what you say the report, it's how you can get them to organize their thoughts that dictates how a story will become. That's number 2. Number 3, offer to be available for last-minute quotes or fact checks. That can be very powerful, because simply, if you want input in how to direct and drive the story, if you get asked at the moment they're about to finish the story, does this make sense? Is this accurate? What do you think about this quote? You get the ability to influence it right at that moment. And so a lot of reporters are not going to want to necessarily send you their entire story, but they might send you a piece of it, quotes of it. Did I get this right? And that's your opportunity to shape the story. And then number 4, suggest news pegs and news angles for feature stories. So when I get through every interview, or I'm coaching our clients to do this, we're always projecting what's the next story. Okay, we're hitting this story, which is like kind of like on the fall retail season. But what does this mean for the holiday season coming up? What does this mean for that Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Thanksgiving weekend? What does this mean for this, what is this holiday I heard of called Singles Day in China? That's the largest day of commerce in the history of the world. What does that mean for the US, right? These are all new angles for future stories. So usually every story or interaction with the journalist, we're always projecting what is that next story. And that starts to shape what the next story will become, which gives you control over that interview as well. Or they say, you know what, that's super interesting. Let's talk about it now. Let's work it in here. And if it's something that's important to you, that's a great way to work it in as well. Okay, so how to direct and drive the interview. Ask the reporter for their intended angle. Help the reporter think about how to organize the story. Offer to be available for last minute quotes or fact checks, and suggest news pegs and new angles for future stories. You'll have a lot more direct control by doing those 4 simple things. Brings us to the next section, which is how to increase clarity and quotability. Being quotable, being clear, is actually not just about what you say. Having something pithy and clever and witty can help, but it's actually not just about that. So let's talk about what are the mechanisms we have at our disposal to be more clear, more quotable, and ultimately driving that 5th B, which is be memorable. Let's talk about it. So I want to go into the screen share again, and specifically want to give you 4 methods for doing this. We give them kind of fun names. They're techniques, they're tactics that you can use to increase clarity and quotability. And then I'm going to circle back in the next section and talk about doing this for TV or radio or magazine or newspaper or online, and some of the differences between the mediums. Okay. First technique to be more clear and quotable is called the counter. So we'll teach our clients to structure organizations like structure answers like a list, right? You asked me about cybersecurity. Well, there's 3 main components to thinking about an organization's cybersecurity response, right? And then you hit the 3. So we're counting things out. We're giving a structure, 1, 2, 3. What is that? Why is that clear for a reporter? Well, the first thing you're going to do is they're going to start writing 1, 2, 3. They're going to follow your structure because you've just clued them in. You've foreshadowed what you're about to say. Oh, I'm going to give you 3 things. So that's one way you can be more clear and quotable, the counter. Second way is the myth buster. So can we bust a myth? Can we say, well, most people think about X, but the truth is actually Y, right? Like, so the general assumption about the pandemic or cybersecurity or this or that is this, but the truth is actually that. So we're setting up a construct where we can contrast something, contradict something. That makes it more clear what's the difference, and it also makes you more quotable, right? Because that's newsworthy. If everyone thinks X, but the truth is actually Y, that's news. Oh my gosh, no one knows the truth, right? So that's the myth buster. Number 3, the shocker. The shocker. And let me give you an example of this. The shocker is like, did you know? Can you believe that? And you follow it up with something. So what does that do? The did you know or can you believe that? That's a clue for the reporter. Pay attention. Write this down. This is a big, this is a whopper. This is a big one, right? So you're using your phrase, and this is really helpful actually in print interviews, because you can say, did you know? Can you believe that? You say it kind of slow. And then they're like, okay, I need to take notes. What is this coming up? So you're highlighting, you're using your delivery, your voice to indicate what's important. Brings us to number 4. Number 4, I'll go into full screen mode here, is the kicker, So it's another variation where you say, well, the key point that everyone misses is, or if there's only one takeaway to remember, it is this. It's like, this is your bold underline, highlight, circle, star, put in red, the whole thing. This is the kicker. So what you're seeing here is that from the counter, okay, there's 3 main solutions, to the myth buster, people think X, but the truth is actually Y, to the shocker, did you know, can you believe? Kicker, well, if there's one takeaway to remember, it's this. What you're doing is you're giving a meta narrative besides your main narrative saying, this is important, pay attention, organize it this way, here's what's news. And you're doing that just in the manner that you talk. So you're being more clear, and these are all things that make you more quotable, which ultimately gives you the ability to drive and direct the interview better. So any questions there? I'm going to pause for a second. Happy to answer any questions. I have a few different channels I'm looking at where questions come in. One of the questions here asks, well, if you're going to use these phrases, do you like memorize how to do this? Is this like you prepare this, or you do it more ad hoc? And I think the answer to that is that I think it's good to practice, but once you start thinking in this manner, saying like, okay, here's how I'm going to contrast like the myth buster. Here's how I'm going to start to count out things. Here's how I'm going to do the shocker. I'm going to do, can you believe that? You practice it, and then you don't have to memorize that anymore, right? It just becomes how you sort of naturally talk. And you just practice knowing that when you want to highlight, underline, say something is important, how do you use one of these methods? Okay, so we now know how to direct and drive the interview. We know how to increase clarity and quotability. Let's talk about specific strategies for specific mediums. The one a lot of people want to get on, people worry about a little bit, is television. So let's talk about strategies for TV. And key thing to realize is that strategies for TV, typical format, it's about, for live interviews, 2 to 4 minutes, probably typical. If it's going to be something edited or taped, like for the evening news, it's typically 30 to 60 seconds. It can even be shortened than that. So first thing to realize about TV is you're dealing with a short format, short medium. As a result, there's some things you need to do and some mistakes that are easy to make because the medium is relatively short. So first thing I want to kind of point out is that actually TV is on the rise. I mean, it's basically the pandemic, people working remotely, and the use of Zoom, Skype, Cisco, WebEx you can do national, local, international TV without ever leaving your home. So it's a great opportunity. I mean, back in the day, 20 years ago, I would have to send people on like road tours, right? You're going to do that, or we do like a satellite. They'd go to like a location, be a satellite interview. We'd stack up 15 interviews in a row, and they just do all of them. Now you don't have to do that. So doing TV is a lot easier. And before you'd never have like, maybe a local outlet would do something over Skype, but never national. Now you do like live on national. I mean, I've done those myself. I've done at least 10 in the past month, national TV live from the comfort of my own home. Okay, so that's the first thing. We realize it's important. So strategies for TV. Number one, confirm the segment length and content before the interview in case it changed. So you might get briefed, it's going to be one way, and there's breaking news, something happens, something changes. So the length is really important. My approach to a 7-minute TV interview is totally different than a 2-minute TV interview, right? I've got to adjust. If the content shifts, and I can tell you this happened one time, my team was prepping me for an interview. I was doing an interview on the pandemic, and I couldn't see the screen, the way it was set up. So all I was doing was I was listening. And suddenly they started asking me about a graph and a chart that I didn't know they were going to use. So they're asking me to describe what's on this chart. I can't see it, and I don't know what it is. And so if the content changed, you need to know. So in that case, I was able to, because I'm experienced at this, kind of like talk to the interviewer in a way that says, well, tell me how you look at this trajectory of this chart, and what is the first part you see? And then they described it, and then I knew what chart they were talking about, and then I could respond, and I could do it. So I had to do kind of a workaround. But if you can confirm segment length and content, ideally right before you're going to do this. So if you're in the waiting room, typically for TV, you come on, they kind of put you in if you're doing this from home, in the sort of the virtual green room, you're talking to your producer. Then you ask them like, hey, is there any visuals you have prepared for the segment? What visuals are you using so I know? Anything change with the length? How are you referring to me on screen? You can kind of ask those questions and know, and you can adjust. So that's number one for TV. Number two, sequence key sound bites to summarize your main points. So the whole key with TV, it's a short medium. So how do you sequence and go between sound bites? Not just have the sound bite, it's the transition between them to make your point, right? Maybe you're talking about, viral marketing. One of the things I talk about in TV, and you're like, hey, there's a viral circle. Mass media feeds social media, which feeds influencers, which circles back to mass media. And to get something to go viral, you need all three parts of that viral circle working together, right? So it's like, okay, that's a complex point, right? You're like actually saying like, okay, going viral is actually integrated. There's different levers. There's different parts to this. There's mass media, there's social media, there's influencer. They all work together. They feed each other. There's a more detailed way to say it. But instead, I know that I'm getting to like the viral circle, this concept people can understand. We're going to drive that home and use it to do this. I'm going to spin that into another soundbite as well. So sequence key soundbites to summarize your main points. Number 3 for TV, avoid rambling answers. Biggest new media mistake for TV is you get a tough question. You don't know the answer well, so you meander. Problem is, if it's a 2-minute interview, you use up all your time on something you don't know well. Maybe it's something you don't even want to talk about. So instead, try to answer the question quickly as best you can, and then move it to something related that you do want to talk about. So avoid rambling answers. If you don't have something related to talk about, answer it quick, stop, get a new question, reset, so you don't use up all your time. Okay, so that's TV. Let's go into strategies for print and online. So it can vary the format, whether are you the focus? Is this a feature all about you, or are you a supporting commentator or expert that is just going to give your 2 cents or your analysis? So it depends. We can talk about strategies for that. So number 1 is make it easy for the reporter to take good notes. So here is an example of this. When I want to make it easy, what can you do to make it easy for a reporter to take good notes? Well, I kind of naturally, my natural cadence, I'm kind of a sort of a high energy person naturally. I talk pretty fast. So when I'm talking like this and I want a reporter to take good notes, I'll start talking. Well, the key thing is this, right? It's a little bit of a kicker. And then I'll say, you have to leverage the viral circle if you want your content to go viral. That means mass media, social media, and influencers in sequence to create the desired effect, right? So I totally slowed down my cadence in this case to help the reporter take good notes. What else can I do? I can say it again. So, and just to be clear, what I mean about the viral circle is, and I say it again, right? Or I can ask them, hey, I know that's kind of complex. It's a kind of our jargon, but I'd love to, to answer any specific questions you have about the viral circle, right? Now I've just said, okay, if anything's unclear, ask me. I'll say it again. I'll explain it, right? So make it easier for the reporter to take good notes. That's number 1. Number 2, I alluded to this already a little bit. Slow down your spoken cadence when you want to be quoted. One of the things you have to do is you can slow it down like I did to give emphasis, but also if you want the reporter to get it right, they need to have time to take notes. Yes, maybe your interview is being recorded, but it's kind of time consuming to go back to the recording. I'd rather have the reporter get that exact soundbite I want exactly down on their page. So go slow. Take your time. Make sure they got it. That will help you be quoted as well. Number 3, print and online interviews. Prepare a response to the anything I should have asked, any ending question. So in journalism school, we're often actually taught to ask this question, right? We're actually supposed to say like, okay, well, if there's anything I missed, if there's anything that should have been covered, tell me, what is it, right? Because maybe you didn't ask the right question. So usually that's an opportunity. Usually it comes at the end. And usually it's an opportunity to steer things exactly to the message you want. So have something prepared. Even if they already asked it already, reiterate it again in a slightly different way. And that's your opportunity to like kind of drive home your message where you want to go. So anything else I should have asked you, then you've got to actually, one thing, and you could say, actually, well, we could talk about this, or you could say, actually, one thing I want to emphasize, we touched on it a little bit, but it's really this key point, which is, right? And then you do your point. Okay, so those are all things you can do. So we've structured TV, we've structured print and online. Now let's kind of end with our kind of final section before I wrap up with the final thought of the day, which is what to do in special circumstances. This is something, so when we do a live training session for a company, we can do that remote, we can do that in person. Usually if we're doing a full day session, second half of the day, we actually do we do mock interviews, we film all of them, and we throw in some curveballs. We throw in some special circumstances so that people can see how they react on camera. We can coach them and they experience it with us, not with someone else for the first time. So let me give you some special circumstances and what you can do. We'll go into full screen mode here. So first special circumstance, and what to do is, what if you just need to buy more time? Buy more time. So this comes up, they've asked you a tough question. You need to think about it for a second. You go blank. You don't know what to answer. So strategy for that is you just take up some time in an engaging way, often by complimenting the journalist. You say, well, that's a great question, Bob. And it just gives you some time to settle into your thoughts. Or, well, I think you've highlighted something really important, and it's important that the audience takes note of this, which is, right? Just giving you some time to settle into this. So automatically you practice this enough, you just kind of default into this when you just need some time to gather your thoughts. And complimenting the question, always a good, always a time taker upper that generally, gives, a little bit of a, makes the, reporter feel a little bit good about themselves. Okay, so that's buy more time. Second, for special circumstances, let's say you don't know the answer. You don't know the answer. So what you can do in that case is you have to address it. You can't just do the politician move, which is like you get asked this and you just like answer a different question. But if you don't know the answer, you can acknowledge it and move on to something you do know that's related. So, well, I don't have the definitive answer on that, but what I do know is this. This oftentimes comes up, and I do a lot of interviews around data, and sometimes people ask for a point of data that I don't have. They'll say like, okay, well, if this type of content goes viral all the time, what about this other type of content? How often does that go viral? And I don't have the data point. So again, what you'd say is like, well, I don't have the definitive answer on that exact statistic, but what I do know about virality, and I'll move into another statistic I do have, it's seamless. And so you sort of address that you don't know very quickly, but then pivot to something you do know. That's what you can do if you don't know the answer. Number 3, special circumstance. Well, what if you need to avoid the topic? Let's say you're representing your company or you're coaching someone else who does, and you get asked about a legal issue, a pending lawsuit the company has. That's above your pay grade, or you just don't even want it to. Maybe it's in your pay grade, you don't want to talk about it. So how can you do that? You might say, well, that's actually not an area I focus on in my work, but what I actually care about is this. And then you try to pivot. And if it comes back to it again, you say it again. Well, again, that's not something that I can comment on. That's something someone else handles. But where I think it's important to talk about is this, right? So just reiterate that, avoid the topic, and just say it's not part of your work. And usually it's accepted because people don't want you talking about something that you're not credible on, you're not supposed to be talking about, you don't have expertise in, right? So that's why you can avoid the topic. And number 4, what if you just have to end the interview? It's going south or something's come up, your co-founder, your company messaging you like, oh my God, we got to deal with this. It's a customer service issue. You just got to get out of this interview. This is a last resort. But if you need to get out of the interview, there's a couple things you can do. So it's like, well, I've got a hard stop coming up, but if there's other questions, I'm happy to set up another time. Just sort of say that. You say, well, actually, I've got a critical meeting starting right now, but if other questions, my email is. So basically, what it allows you to do is sort of say, I can't deal with this right now, but I'm still open to answering. I'm not ducking anything, but then it gives you time and you can decide if you want to answer the email, if you want to set up another time, if you want to have someone else answer it, if you want to try to steer the interview back, it just buys you more time. So not to be used recklessly, but if you got to end the interview, usually it's like something else is happening now that is critical. I've got to go, and do that to get out of it gracefully. Don't do what is the move. You might have seen on TV. I think Rudy Giuliani had a famous one where he just like sort of got up and like walked out. right? In case people get so mad, they just like leave. So better to actually, do this a little bit more gracefully by just sort of giving a reason, leaving, and then you can reassess and talk with your team about what you want to do. Okay. So before we end on final thoughts of the day, a couple other things. Are you interested in in-house training? I love doing this stuff. We call it value first media training. How do you drive more ROI from every interview by delivering more value? If you're interested, you can go to this page. It's at our website, topagency.com. We have more. We have a mock schedule for a typical day. We always customize it, but it looks like this. This is what an agenda looks like, where we start with the morning, an introduction to media and the journalist's point of view and mastering interview techniques. It's great for CEOs and COOs and subject experts and brand ambassadors. And then we go into analysis of sample interviews. We go look at some really good ones, some really bad ones. We analyze them. We do one-on-one training. We film that. We teach you how to handle tougher, surprising questions. And we do all of this in kind of a day format that a lot of people will just say it's like super fun. It's actually like we have like whole executive teams come in and it's like, oh, wow, that was like great team building experience. There's a lot of camaraderie. There's a lot of laughter. It's high energy. So I want to mention that. Second, questions on this. Want to follow up with something? Want to see the slide deck? ben.kaplan@topagency.com. Let me know. I'm happy to answer questions. And also, if you're interested in potential training, let me know as well. Again, it's one of my favorite topics. Love to do it. And I've got a whole team of people that are great trainers as well. Okay, so ben.kaplan@topagency.com. I always want to know what's the one thing. So tweet at me, at Benjamin Kaplan. The one thing is, what's the one thing that you found most useful, interesting, surprising today? One thing you'll take away. If you were taking screenshots, you got a screenshot of it, tweet it at me. I love to know. One of the things we deal with is what's sticky? What's memorable? I always want to know what's memorable. So tweet at me at Benjamin Kaplan, what's the one thing? And finally, let me end on the final thought of the day. So all of this with media training that we've discussed, where did we go? There's a lot of components to this. It can seem a little bit overwhelming, right? We talked about, well, here's why it's important. Here are the 5 Bs, be likable, be believable, be memorable. We talked about how do you take more control of the interview. We talked about the 4 different types of answers. No, I can deliver, a data point or, an analysis or a prediction or an anecdote. We then talked about how to improve your quotability and okay, I can slow down. I can make things easier. How to direct and drive the interview. Okay, I can help the interviewer organize their thoughts, steer their direction. Okay, now I got TV and I got to, remember, sequence those sound bites and ask what their angle is and print it online, make it easier to take notes. And all of that is there. And this was a taste of all of that. But people were like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. Or like, I'm in my own head. I can't even do the interview. I'm trying to remember all these things. So my final point, my probably most important point of the day is to remember is that don't seek to do all of these all at once in your next interview. Try to do it incrementally. So be like, I'm going to get 5% more passionate and likable in this interview. And maybe I'll actually work on, my use of data points and anecdotes, right? And that's it. And let's increment those. Then let's go to the next interview. And we'll do that. We'll improve it a different way. So my point is that this isn't all or nothing. This isn't like either you're fantastic or you're horrible. Try to get 5% better, 7% better, 10% better in this dimension. And what you will discover is that it is like compound interest. You get a little bit better, you get a little bit more comfortable, then it gets easier to get better. You get a little bit more experience, you get this tough question, you handle it well, you get more confident. And I've seen people go in 3 or 6 months time, sometimes even less than that, from very, very, questionable ability to wow, complete confidence, command and control of that interview in a very short amount of time. But it's not by trying to do everything at once. It's by being incremental. And I would encourage, if you're coaching anyone or training anyone or teaching anyone to do that, to encourage your clients to do that as well. So that being said, I'm Ben Kaplan. I'm the CEO of Top Worldwide. You can find us online at topagency.com. ben.kaplan@topagency.com is my email. I'd love to be a resource for you for your next training or actually conduct a media training. And remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Incrementally improve and be likable, be believable, be passionate, be memorable. Put all these aspects together, and what you will find is that you are more confident, you're more persuasive, people are more interested, you deliver more value, and being a part of the media can be a great asset in your toolbox and something that affects your entire professional and personal life. So that being said, thanks for tuning in. Next week, same time, same place, new marketing topic. Sign up at topagency.com, go to the knowledge section, go to events, and I wish you all that kind of success. Cheers. Take care.